Everybody's got a story. You just have to listen. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavilla, and this is Good Listen. And today, Kayla-Brooke White tells her story. If you go to a therapist, have you ever asked them, hey, how'd you become a therapist? Well, probably not, because usually the questions go the other way, but I often wonder how a therapist becomes a therapist. So that's why Kayla-Brooke White is here. She's going to tell us how she became one, what drives her, and how she helps women and couples every day with therapy and life coaching. Kayla, how are you?
I am doing great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, although when a therapist asks you that, it's kind of a loaded question, but this is not a therapy session. We're just going to chat. But so I want to start with that, like therapy. I'm a Generation Xer. So the idea of therapy is like, oh, that's what crazy people do. That's what people
Yeah.
with problem do.
Yeah.
So I come from that generation. So full transparency, I've never been to a therapist, although my wife and mom probably thinks I should have gone to a therapist. I've never have. But tell me about the current state of therapy, because one of the things that I've noticed during my lifespan is the fact that those old cliche of like, if you go to a therapist, something's wrong with you, are long gone. I past guest, I had Sarah Tick, who's a dating coach. She said to me that women like to see on like dating profiles that a man who goes to therapy. So I'm assuming a lot of those cliches have come and gone, but tell me about the current state of therapy.
Yeah. I think most people use therapy now as maintenance. I think a lot of people have realized that therapy can elevate your life. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that something's wrong with your life. I think people, even in really good places, can use therapy to gain skills like emotional intelligence, learning how to fight fair, communication styles, attachment styles that, like, using the dating example, if they're dating, it does help to know your attachment style. You're not really going to, most people are not out here learning the work of attachment theory in their own time. So I think I see a lot of, and I used to work a lot with more trauma based and maybe more specific demographics with people. Now, my current clients really seek therapy to elevate where they are now.
Interesting. So it's almost like home improvements. Like there's a couple things they want to work on. And let's get to, before we get to how you help these clients, how you got to helping clients. Because therapist is one of those jobs that it falls under, doctor or physician or something like that. But it's
Yeah.
it's part of that umbrella because, as a kid, doctors, lawyers, firefighters, and then obviously there's a little more a nuance once you get later in life. So how did you find that path for yourself?
Yeah. So I feel a little lucky that my parents, who are in their 60s now, they divorced when I was around 11 ish. And they actually put my brother and I in therapy because they didn't want to triangulate us. They didn't want it to be mom and dad, like us picking sides or any type of triangulation. So I actually started seeing a therapist at a pretty young age in around middle school, and I saw
Wow.
her through high school. So my experience started really young, and I remember loving going to her office. So I became a psychology and sociology double major when I was in undergrad. And I did one of my internship years at a pregnancy center during college, which that's kind of the thing with therapy is unless you are in grad school, you can't get internships doing therapy. So you kind of have to find ways to do it that are more nonprofit based because it's less clinical a little bit. So I did an internship working at a pregnancy center where we kind of are counseling women through options and, whatever they want to do. And then I took a break between undergrad and grad school, but the end goal was always to be a therapist. And that
Wow.
kind of started pretty young for me.
That's pretty cool. It's funny, talking about your parents divorcing and putting you guys in therapy. I remember, again, showing my age, there used to be actual specials about what parents going through divorce and the effects of the kids. And I remember every time my parents got into a fight, I would cry, like, oh my God, mom and dad are getting a divorce, not knowing that, you're perfectly fine. But I think also the idea that the kids are fine on their own because kids are resilient It's
Yeah.
it's interesting that your parents were so proactive in
Yeah.
putting you guys in therapy at such a young age. Do you know where they got that idea from?
Honestly, I do not know. That's a great question. I should ask them. I know it really started because for me, when they started dating again, that kind of rattled me. They didn't have a bad divorce. In fact, I don't really remember the intricacies of their divorce because they kept that away from us, which I think was a great thing. But I do remember around the time when they started dating again, they didn't want us to bash the other
Yeah.
parent. So I know, I would think that they wanted an outlet. They were like, okay, what's an outlet that they can have to go and talk to about some of these big feelings that's not going to tarnish like the relationship with either of them?
Interesting. And it's obvious that had it impacted you, your life going forward. But when you were that kid, were you self-aware enough to realize that what you were doing was a good thing? Because I can imagine, again, I'm just assuming here, I can imagine that there probably weren't a ton of kids that you knew, your friends, that were going to therapy at that age. So did you realize what it was doing to you at the time?
I honestly, I don't think so, and I don't remember talking about therapy as a child. Like for me, it was just we had our appointment every week, and that's what it was. And I viewed it more as I think like a doctor's appointment. Like, oh, I just go and talk to this person. I don't think it really resonated. Like, I don't ever remember having conversations with friends about therapy and what we're talking about. But I do remember really liking her. She was a woman and she was so validating. I remember when, especially my dad started dating someone because, the dad, daughter, stepmom dynamic can get a little tricky for some people. I remember her like bringing my dad in and she was so good at explaining to him where some of my feelings are coming from. I remember little things like that where I was like, wow, that's so helpful. But in the big picture, at the time, I don't think I realized what was going on.
Yeah, as kids, we suck at self-awareness, but I was just curious because you seem so advanced because you were going through this process, and I wondered if you even realized that it was having this effect. And obviously, it left an imprint in you that you were like, "This is what I want to do for the rest of my life." And was that what you were like in high school, and like right when you were going to make that decision to college, that it was like no question, therapy was the way to go?
I was always an academic. I always prioritized school and education. So I knew I wanted to do something of, I don't know how to word that, like impact. I think that was always something that I wanted to do. I'm from a very, very rural town of, I mean, we don't have a stoplight in our entire county. So I knew I wanted to get out of there. And honestly, I didn't know, like a lot of bigger city people, I didn't know a lot of people who had forged their own career path. A lot of people that I grew up with, they stayed in the same job for 40 years and then they got retirement and then that's just what they did. So I always knew I wanted to get out of my small town. I wanted to do something of impact. And I always loved the mental health field. That's why I declared a psychology, sociology double major. And I think it was in college that I really solidified like this is what I want to do.
That's awesome. And then so you go into that nonprofit space, but then how do you make the jump from doing that to where you are today, where it's a mixture of life coach and therapist? Well, tell me about that transition.
Yeah. I, went to grad school and in grad school we have to do residency. So in residency, you have to have X amount of hours. So what they try to do in residency is have you do your practicum and internships at different places to get a feel for what you like. So I did one of mine at the DC jail, and then I did another one at Phoenix House, which is an inpatient, outpatient PHP substance abuse rehabilitation center. And while I loved working with those populations, I realized that wasn't necessarily for me. And then I did my residency in a private practice setting. So I have field work experience in pregnancy centers and drug and substance abuse in the criminal justice department. And then I really wanted that private practice experience. So learning the private practice experience, they don't really teach you business tools in grad school to be a therapist.
Right.
So I used that time to really pick up skills of I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I don't like working for other people. I like my own schedule. I like autonomy. I like that's very, very important to me. So I really had to navigate how can I do that? So I tried to use all of my experiences combined to then when it was time for me to go out on my own, I was like, I feel like I can do this.
Wow, that's so cool. If you don't mind going back to the time when you were working at with jails and with in sort of rehab facility,
Yeah.
you're a self-described country girl. Was there a bit of culture shock that you're like, holy shit, what did I get myself into?
Yeah, a little bit. So I come from this rural tiny little town in Southeast Virginia, and then I went to undergrad at UVA. Then I did all my grad school in DC. So I kind of went from a really small town to medium-sized place, Charlottesville, to DC, the nation's
Yeah.
capital. I did have so a little self-disclosure, my brother is incarcerated. So I've known a lot about the justice system just from that. And working there, that was my first placement was it was less therapy and more it's basic things that you don't think of, like getting their birth certificates to them so that when they get released, they can't really think about their mental health because what they're thinking about is if I'm coming up to be released, I don't have any paperwork to legitimize me. I can't get
Wow.
a job without my birth certificate. I can't get a social security card without it. I can't get an ID without it. How am I supposed to get to and from work with no ID? I can't get a credit card without an ID. So that experience was less therapy and more learning the inner workings of the justice system and why there is a lot of work that needs to be done there because you really can't go get into the mental health space with a lot of these people because they're worried about where am I going to live and how am I going to make money and what am I going to do. They're not worried about how they're feeling.
Wow.
So it was less of that in that setting, which I do think was still extremely helpful for me to learn. And then in the substance abuse clinic, that was really interesting because, in private practice, you have boundaries. Like there's so many boundaries when you work in private practice. Like my clients really don't know that much about me, but I know a lot about them. Whereas when you work in a substance use, when you're assigned a client, especially in a rehab, like you have to go into the bathroom stall with them while they take their drug test. So like you're getting to really know them.
Wow.
So that was a wild experience for me personally because I was like, this just that's not what you think of when you think of being a therapist. So you really have to build that trust because they either really like you and feel like you're on their side or you are the bane of their existence because you know people can only accept the change that they want. So you're given a mixed bag of people. So I wasn't really used to a lot of confrontational people until I worked in that setting. Because it's hard to tell somebody your drug test came back
Mm.
positive, and but yet you still want them to like you. So it's a lot of trust building and rapport building, and interesting place to work. So yeah, that was a huge shock for me because I lived a pretty naive life to some of bigger real world issues like an opioid crisis and all of that.
Wow. That sounds like a lot. And going back to the point that you made that you have an entrepreneurial spirit. So I've worked with a lot of doctors and people in the healthcare industry who decide later on in life that they want to be entrepreneurs. But the one thing that they've always told me is when you're going to medical school, you're going to grad school, the idea of classes that are business minded, there's not even a iota of a chance for you to learn that. And that's why a lot of physicians and people that go into healthcare have a lot of problem First of all, they don't have that entrepreneurial gene, which I have this running joke because I do a lot of business podcasts. It's like, I feel like entrepreneurs are psychopaths. And I apologize for using that term in this setting
Oh,
here, but like, it's really hard to do so. So the
yeah,
idea of doing this track of working in the healthcare field, no matter which one you're doing, there's nothing they teach you about how to run a business, how to run an office, none of that. So
yeah.
where did the entrepreneurial spirit come for you where it blended perfectly with your therapy experience? Because I'm telling you, that is very rare from all the folks that I've spoken to.
Yeah, I agree. I think entrepreneurs were our own kind of breed. But so my dad was a business owner. He owns a trucking company. So I just remember his grit and I mean, as an entrepreneur, you get it. There's not days off. It's you have a business or you don't. It's not like, oh, I'm going to have my business a few days a week and then I'm done with it. That's not really how it is. So I remember watching him work a ton as a child. So I do think subconsciously that helped a little bit. And then, but in grad school, it's kind of funny. I remember professors saying this all the time. You don't become a therapist if you want to make money. You don't become a therapist if you want to make money. And I remember thinking, why, why is there, like, why is it bad to want to create personal wealth? What, like, yes, we're helpers and we have a part of us that are serious empaths, but I don't think that that means we can't or shouldn't be allowed to also make good money. So I remember hearing that, and I kind of am, I'd like to go against the grain a little bit. And I remember hearing that from multiple professors, and I thinking, that's not true. Like, I want to make decent money. I want to build a life for myself, and I'm going to do that with this career path. So I think that it's kind of one of those things when you hear somebody say, you can't do that, you're like, okay, well, let's see.
Good for you. Yeah, it's such a strange message because I get where they're coming from that you're not, I mean, you're not going to make millions of dollars as a therapist. It's obvious. Yeah, like we get that. But why they would say that to you in such a way? Because yes, obviously you're not going to, start a tech company and become a billionaire as a therapist, but
Yeah.
but you can make a living. If therapists didn't make a living, there would be no therapists. Very odd.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was a really weird um message as well, but then it's backed. It is backed by insurance companies. Really don't, a lot of people don't, unless you've ever been a provider that accepts and you get paid from taking insurance, you really don't understand how it works. And how do you know how it works?
No, please share.
So basically how it works, let's say you're the therapist and I'm the client and I have Anthem. You accept Anthem. How it works is, okay, I'm coming to you. I have Anthem insurance. You accept that. You have to have a contract with Anthem. Say your rate's 150 an hour.
Okay.
You go to Anthem and you say, my rate's 150 an hour. I'd like to accept clients using Anthem. One would think that Anthem would pay you 150 an hour, right? With how much money insurance companies make. No, they are like, we will give you $60 an hour for every client that you see with Anthem. So you take $60. By the time you take out taxes and your overhead and costs and then pay yourself, you're working for like $10, $12 an hour. Really, truly. And that's how it is. And a lot of these big insurance companies, they don't let you renegotiate your contract for like 3 to 5 years. So once you lock in that rate and they don't negotiate with you because they don't have to, that's what you get. So if you work now, every client that you see with Anthem, instead of your 150 rate, you're going to get $60 from them. And they can take up to 90 days to pay you. So when you get started out, you might have 3 months before you even get reimbursed.
Wow.
So
Now, wait a
it's,
minute, though. Doesn't the patient then pay the other remaining balance, though?
no, you have a copay. It's all about insurance, but no, no,
Oh, okay.
no. So it's, that almost reinforces this idea that therapists don't make good money because they're not really legitimized by insurance companies the way that some other practitioners are.
Wow, that sucks, man. I just assume that because I just know, like, listen, I go to the dentist, I give my insurance card, and then
Yeah.
I get a call back later, like, oh, your insurance only covered, 80%. You owe us, $40. I'm like, all right, I guess, and I just assumed it was the same way in the healthcare space. That's crazy. Oh, again, I apologize for that, but that's not that doesn't sound right.
No, it's wild, and that's unfortunately why more and more people aren't accepting insurance and going into the coaching space because it's just, and then if you're like me and you wanted to work for yourself, you don't want to spend 20 hours a week billing for insurance. It's that's time that you can be, so it they almost keep you, I feel like that's the cycle that a lot of therapists get stuck in is they might not have that entrepreneur gene, and then if they do, it's hard to get started, so they just stay working in these other, modes of being a therapist because that's what's easy, because they don't make it easy for us to go out on our own.
Wow, that sucks. And so now as a therapist, how do you personally, if you don't mind talking about it, like, are you one of those where, hey, listen, I just can't accept a healthcare insurance because it's just not worth it at the end of the day? As much as you want to help people,
Yeah.
you obviously have a living to make, right?
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, have just always, I just am upfront with people and I say, unfortunately, I don't take insurance. And if that is a restricting factor for them, I have referrals that I'll give them. And I feel lucky that it's never been a huge issue for me. Word of mouth and referrals have always been worked in my favor, which is great. I feel very lucky for that. I've never spent a dollar on marketing. But it's it is hard when there's a client who you can tell really wants to work with you and you just can't. However, I do offer a certain amount of sliding scale spots. So I have some clients who I offer a sliding scale because I think that's important and there should be some balance. I don't necessarily think it's always fair to, so let's say I have a middle-aged lawyer and a college student. It doesn't make sense that they would be able, that might be, 2% of this person's monthly income and that might be 20 or 30% of this
Right.
person's income. So I do offer like a sliding scale with some of my clients.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. And we talked about sort of the current state of therapy, and I'm just curious. As much as I hate talking about the pandemic, I almost want to feel like it never happened. But what is how is that? How did that change everything? Because I know there was the big push to virtual medicine at the time, telemedicine, all that. Did you embrace that at the time? What's it like now? Are more and more people coming back to the office to see you? Just give a rundown of how that's been going.
Yeah, I was in DC when the pandemic started. So DC was very shut down. Nothing was open. We went completely virtual right when everything happened. So I noticed that we retained a lot of our clients because people actually had more time. Like, I used to have clients that they could only meet at 6 p.m. because they had to leave work at 5. So I feel like it benefited a lot of people. We definitely saw an uptick in people reaching out for therapy. And since then, it's a mixed bag. I feel like some people and certain generations, younger generations, they love Zoom, they love teletherapy or telehealth or whatever. But I have an office. I think for me, I like going into an office. There's something about it that makes me feel like I'm being, I don't know, one, just getting out of my house, but two, I like to give people the option. Like, I have plenty of people that are like, virtual's fine and great, and I love it. And then there's people that they like the space that a room holds that doesn't necessarily, that's not in their home. Like, they might not want the things that we are going through and opening up. I call it the boxes. Like, we open up boxes in some sessions, and maybe they don't want to do that in their bedroom or where their roommate can hear them or their spouse or kids or whatever. So I think a lot of people do really like having a space that's just for that they can then leave.
That's cool. No, and the last thing about the pandemic is I always wonder what the lasting effects of it going to be. And my brother had a child on March 1st of 2020, so he's basically a pandemic baby. Lived in New Jersey, everything locked down, nothing going on, and it's an only child. And
Yeah.
I have conversations with him and my wife. I'm like, man, what is this? What? How will that, 2.5 year, just basically like people trapped in a house? How is that going to affect the child? And I know you don't work, you might still work with adults, but I'm just curious in terms of like the effect that those couple of years had on people
Yeah.
and what's the trail of it now? What are you seeing?
I feel like couples were really, really impacted or stunted by it. I think the pandemic either strengthened a lot of people or it, you know, made them lose a few skills that are important, like communication skills or just social skills for some people. When you're not, every skill that we have is like a muscle. And if you're not working that muscle, it's going to get weaker and weaker. So, lasting impacts are, I think a lot of people didn't learn how to communicate their needs effectively. For instance, let's say you have a couple who's living in the same house, really couldn't leave for a long time. Maybe their needs were that they needed space, but instead that came out as they got used to just blaming the other person. Like, you know, you're in this cramped space. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people just learned they started playing the blame game with a lot of things instead of taking personal responsibility and learning how to like communicate their needs of what was wrong because we had this big external thing that we could put blame on that people didn't really take responsibility for maybe actions that were in their control. Like they'd be like, "Well, I'm cramped and we can't do anything." So they'd take that out on, whoever was closest to them or whatever their environment was when really um they I don't it's hard to conceptualize, but I feel like that's one of the biggest things is people not using that time to really become self-aware because it was so easy to be like, the pandemic is making me feel like this. I feel what it's like, yes, that sucked and it was horrible. We still have personal responsibility for certain things. And I think a lot of people place a lot of blame on COVID that had, was more of an internal thing.
Mm. It's funny that you mentioned that because I remember a lot of the jokes at the beginning of the pandemic because we were all full of jokes during the pandemic. Was, oh man, can you imagine the number of babies that are going to be born? But it turned
Yeah.
out to be the opposite. People kind of just lost their drive. They were still at home and they were with their partner, but they just were not in the mood because obviously,
Yeah.
global pandemics don't put people in a mood.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about that in terms of the what happened? Like those, do you feel like they're just lost years for a lot of people?
I think some people, yeah. I mean, I really think when, especially couples, because I love working with couples, I think that it either made them stronger and learn how to be really good communicators because you had to be, because you were on top of each other all the time if you lived together, or it drove a huge wedge between people and they were like, I don't want to see you for like days because, I think there was this kind of separation between the two. And I think people either magnified, it was a magnifier. It either magnified the good that was in the relationship or it magnified the parts of the relationship that weren't really that great. So I do think for a lot of people and for kids, I do think I've noticed some social skill delays with some kids and teens. You know, some of these kids went from being like 8 to 11. That's a huge developmental gap from going from, 8, that's around like second, third grade, to being a middle schooler. You were once in school with kindergartners and first and second graders, and now you're in school with seventh and eighth graders. Like that's a strange jump to make between that time period.
Yeah. And you mix the pandemic with technology. I feel like the last few years it just has made more assholes. And I don't know if you see that in the therapy space, but to
Yeah.
me, I feel like the technology hardens us. It makes us people be mean and dismissive and cold. But then on top of that, you have more technology because of the fact that you can't go anywhere and see and interact with other people. So
Yeah.
tell me about this current state of assholeness. And I know it's a weird way to say it, but are you seeing that in terms of how that's coming up in relationships and how people are just becoming more hardened and more detached in their relationships with either other people in their current relationship or just in general with people in their hemisphere?
I think technology is wonderful. We wouldn't be doing this podcast without it. I wouldn't. However, I think that technology has made a lot of cowards. I think technology is a great way for cowards to, keyboard warriors.
Yeah.
That's what they are. I think for a lot of people, the pandemic and not really having maybe social outlets, because what for people that maybe were really social and weren't able to get that out, maybe did become a little bit pent up and frustrated. And one of the only outlets we had was the internet during
Right.
COVID. So I definitely think that. But I think in general, people, I think most people do not use technology in a healthy way. I think people can hide behind it. I think people use it in very negative ways. I think it's a bully's greatest asset is is a cell phone. They can say and do whatever they want, or they think they can say and do whatever they want with no consequences. And it's yeah, I think that that's like a crisis, and I think that's enhanced as technology has continued to grow, and we see it with AI stuff. We see it all the time of there's just more means to do harm the more technology that we have, and I do think that's really sad. So I try to personally limit it. I've been a victim of people on the internet. You probably have too. It's horrible. It's not fun to like receive things, but you have to also remember like there's only a certain type of person that uses um, technology to be mean, and those people probably aren't people I would surround myself with in real life either. So I
Right.
have to like remember that too.
And on the flip side of that is you use technology for good. You have your popular Instagram feed, the Therapy Queen. Tell me about that divergence of being able to do what you do, but help more people through this technology that we've just been shitting on for the last 5 minutes. But how do you use it for good?
I just like to post real life things. I don't really have a method to my page. Sometimes I'm like, I want to have a very curated page, but that's not real. I like my favorite people that I follow on social media are the ones that are authentic, that are the ones that are saying, my life might look perfect on the outside, but it's not. I'm having a really hard day. I'm struggling with this. So I really use it to again, I like to magnify the good because who doesn't? If something great is going on in our life, we like to share that. But I also use it to magnify the things that aren't really great in my life so that other people can see, I think anybody with a social media presence, women particularly, it's there's a lot of people that look at accounts and they think, wow, that girl looks like she has everything together. She has this or she has that. And I think it's really important to sometimes be like, it looks like that, but that's not real. Like, what's real is this or that. Or, I got a bunch of messages from somebody yesterday on my social media account telling me I needed to be on Ozempic and I looked like a whale, like all these things. And I shared that to my stories. I was like, I get messages like this. And instead of responding, I am going to show. And I got so many messages from women being like, I would never think that you would get messages like that. Like, and thanks for sharing that because it shows me that like these bullies are not that they don't discriminate. Like, it doesn't matter if you have 50 followers or 10,000 followers or a million followers. Like, we all are subject to some of these people on the internet. So I do like to also share that, even though that's vulnerable and nobody wants to share the things like that. But I think in this space of mental wellness, it's important to be like, things are not always perfect, and that is okay. In fact, that's a good thing. That's how we build grit and resilience.
Wow. I mean, I yeah, so my social media is just like a lot of pictures of my dog, and I talk about my podcast and stuff like that. So I just don't understand how people get off on like the idea of sending a negative message to me just sounds like it doesn't sound like something and it's not, but it just doesn't sound like I'm just trying to find out what their motivation and what they get out of it. Like to me, I'm a huge proponent of self-awareness and understanding what's going on in your life and other people's lives. And to think that sending that message may make you may make a person feel good, but and make the other person feel awful. Like, why would you ever want to do that? It just seems very, very weird. And I'll never understand it.
Me neither. I think it's very weird. I think it's a I mean, I really deeply believe that hurt people hurt people. So when someone's hurting, they tend to hurt other people. But I also think that there really are people that just they don't really have fully developed. Most of us have that our prefrontal cortex, which helps us with decision making and judgment. I know, let's say we're both human. There's people that I don't care for, but I'm not going to go rattle off a message to them, especially with my name attached to it, which I wouldn't anyway, but with my name attached to it in the day and age that we live. But I really do think that that's part of it. I think some people don't think about the consequences of what they do because there's some delay in their judgment of, I'm just going to say this and forget about it. Well, it's the internet. That's really not going to happen. But I think it's a mixed bag of there's some people that do get off on that. They feel better or they're hurt or there's some judgment prefrontal cortex issue.
And last thing on this, Kayla, is the fact that so I worked my entire life in radio, and I always had the perception of if you don't like something that someone does, you just turn it off and watch something else, listen to something else. So to me, the way I've been sort of raised and like the way I live is like, hey, if there's this thing I don't like, I'm not going to boycott it or write about it. I just won't either go shop there. I won't listen to it. I won't watch it. So it is weird. So, and I get it. Like I was very fortunate for like 20 years. I was on the radio in New York. So I had this outlet to say and do what I want to say to other people. But for most people, they didn't have that. So I have this sort of detachment of like, it doesn't pay for me. Like I just had my air conditioner worked on the other day, and I've gotten a text every week from the air conditioning company saying, hey, will you please leave a good review? And I'm like, no, I don't leave bad reviews. I don't leave good reviews. So I don't want to do any of that. And on the subject of reviews, I know that's a big thing in the world of healthcare and therapy.
Yeah.
How do you handle that? Because again, you said the thing, what's out there is out there. So if someone leaves a bad review for Kayla, it's out there and it's probably gonna be out there until the day you die.
Yeah.
How do you grapple with that?
It's never fun to read, any negative thing about yourself. However, I think a huge part of entrepreneurship is I take it back to that because I hired a mindset coach when I went out to work for myself, and we talked about this. They were like, you're going to have people that don't like you, and you're going to have a bad session at some point in your career, and there's going to be somebody that is disgruntled with you. That is part of life. And if you can accept that as part of life before it happens, when it happens, it won't be a huge deal. Because I think in the mental health field, I have to realize that not everybody is going to like me, and I'm not going to like everybody. So if I can accept that and remember that when that has happened, which I've had clients who were like, I don't think we're the best fit. It didn't really sting because I was able to say, that's fair. Like, that is fair. And everybody has bad days, but I'm fortunate so far that I don't have I don't think any negative reviews, but if I do, I don't read them because it's not my business. I live by that. Other people's opinions of me are not my business. The only opinions I care about are the people that I truly feel like know me, which is a very, very, very few people. And if they're not those opinions, then they're not really based in true fact. So I have to like accept that and move on from it.
I love that, and that's such a Southern thing that you just said because a friend of mine who's from South Carolina has that same line, a little separate version, but he basically says other people's opinions of you is none of your business, which
Yeah.
is such a great way to live, but it's really, really hard.
It's really hard because you're like, you don't want to come off as arrogant or cocky or whatever, but you also don't want to let the opinions of other people dictate how you portray yourself. Like, and there's a fine line between that. I think that a lot of people struggle with.
Oh, I can only imagine. So let's converge technology in your entrepreneurship because you also have an Etsy shop where you sell stuff like hot girls go to therapy and stuff like that. Tell me about that. They look great. So, but like who like people buy this stuff?
Yeah, people buy this stuff. It's, I think it's fun. I think it gets a message across that's kind of cheeky. I I'm a pretty cheeky, witty, sarcastic person. And I don't think I really fully embodied that until I was in now in my 30s, where I'm like, that's just who I am. Like I like slogans and little cheeky things like that. So I was like, what's a way to get a therapy message across that also, I remember actually I got inspired by it because I saw a poster or something that said, "My therapist knows about you." And I was like, that's great. I want that. Like I need that. So I I like a brand and I think it's a little bit of a personal brand too. Like even like it, and hot girl doesn't mean it, I'm sure most people read that and think like, oh, physically attractive, but it's more of the concept of like we all want to be like our hot version of ourselves. We want to be put together and feel good and look good. I think most people want that. So I tried to just make that like a fun little slogan and to be like, yeah, a lot of people go to therapy. Don't feel ashamed to go to therapy. I wear mine all the time and I get comments on it every time I wear it. They're like, where did you get that? I love that.
And you say, hey, just go to my Etsy shop. You can buy one for yourself.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
That's great. All right, so I want to wind our conversation down by talking about your work and the people that you see.
Okay.
For folks that might be listening to this and say, like, who does Kayla talk to? Like, what kind of problems? What are some of the common recurring problems that you see walking through your door on those virtual visits with the folks that you're working with?
It really, I feel like I ebb and flow with who I work with. I work with a lot of this is just at the most basic level, but self-esteem rooted in maybe that's anxiety or depression or confidence. I see a lot of that. I also see a lot of if someone is in a relationship or if they're a couple, learning how to fight fair. Like, we all know that couple that when they fight, they blow up and they don't know how to have that what is the balance there? So I see a lot of couples who really want to come in and learn like, okay, we're not always going to get along. So what do we do when we're not getting along? They kind of want that coach in that situation to be like, this is what based on both of your needs, this is what probably needs to happen when there is conflict. Or this is how to communicate when you are feeling a certain way, or this is what you do when your partner's feeling a certain way, or vice versa. So I see a lot of skills based clients that come because my style of like coaching is very direct and very how do we get from point A to point B? If this is happening, this is what I think based on what I know about you, what is going to help you. I used to do a lot more of the going back and processing work, but I really like the work of how I said in the beginning of the call, someone's already doing pretty well and they want to elevate and reach whatever that next level is in their life, whether that's finding a healthy relationship or maybe getting a promotion at work or getting a new job or enhancing their relationship. I actually got a text last week from a client. I was working with them as a couple, and she sent me a picture of her engagement ring. And she was like, I have news. And, we worked on a lot of skills. Like, they broke up actually, and I was still working with them as a couple, but just learning the skills to get back together because they did feel like they were healthy together, but they needed space and they moved out of their home and now they're moving back in the home and they're engaged. So it's like the power of learning skills is what I really like to teach people, I guess.
That's awesome. All right, and lastly, the Golden Bachelor. I don't know if you saw the. I didn't watch the show, but apparently it's an older gentleman got with an older woman. Happy ending. Nope, they got divorced after 3 months. And I only bring this up because I'm using it as a jumping off point as to why relationships don't work and why it's so easy for people to get in and out of. And I'm talking about like seriously. I'm not talking about flings or that. Like you see marriages last months or a year. If you were to put your finger on the one reason why relationships don't work, and I know there's probably a million, what would one be that you feel like is the one of the biggest drivers as to why relationships don't work?
I I have thought about this question a lot. My personal opinion is there's some difference of values. I think some people might say trust or communication or whatever. I think at the end of the day, we have our basic set of values that we live by, whether that's, how we like to spend our money or how we like to spend our time or how we like to communicate. And if those are not aligned, then it's going to cause issues for you. So I think it goes down to just your basic set of values. Like, are you aligned on the things that really matter? Because if you are, you can get through the hard times. You can have the hard conversations. But if you're misaligned on one of those things that might seem very basic, for instance, like social life, for some people that has a really high value. They really care about their community or whatever. How do you mesh that with somebody that likes to be home? And, at the end of the day, I think it's a differences in one of the core values that you have. And I didn't watch the season either, but I think that might have been one of the things because they were living separately. So maybe they didn't fully take into account, oh, my family is here and family is a very high value that I have, and I'm not willing to relocate because that means I'd have to disattach from the value of family that I have, and I'm not going to do that for a marriage. But it comes down to the value of family that that person has.
That's
At least
great.
that's my opinion.
No, I love that. And one of the and obviously not a therapist, but and I write about this a lot is the idea of curiosity. And I always feel many relationships fail because one person is no longer curious about the other one. Like once the idea of like I don't care how they're feeling today or I don't care how their day was. Once that creeps into a relationship, I feel like that's sort of the beginning of the end because at that point, then it turns into anger and annoyance. But I think that curiosity piece is one
Yeah.
thing people don't think about. They don't think about because I think that's what the key to a long lasting relationship is the curiosity that drives you always wanting to know what's going on in that person's mind, what they're thinking, what's their opinion about something. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I just throw my 2 cents of therapy in there, 2 years of college for communication, so it doesn't count. But that's what I feel.
Totally. I totally agree. I think we have to look at our partner with a sense of when I go through an emotional needs with clients, admiration is one of them. And I think the second that that goes missing, the relationship will go south. I think if you are not looking at your partner thinking, how can I make them happy? Or with some level of admiration, or like you said, curiosity, then really, what do you have? Like, we can go have a conversation about anything with anybody, but if you're not actively choosing to continue to have meaningful conversations with your partner, then that's a major red flag in the trajectory of your relationship.
Awesome. All good stuff. Kayla, if folks want to get in touch with you, find out more about you, where would be the best place to start?
Instagram, the therapy queen. I remember when I got that handle, I was shocked that it still existed. And then my email is Kayla at KaylaBrookeWhite.com. So it's very easy. And you can email me from my Instagram as well. So yeah, thank you. That was really fun.
And that's today's Good Listen. I'm Joe Pardavilla. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavilla or TikTok at jpardavilla. If you'd like to shoot me a note, you can send an email to joepardavilla at protonmail.com. And if you have a moment, I would love if you could leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave a big old thumbs up. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it. Until next time, adios.